Yeah.
Hi, Sam Husseini from IPA Media. This is obviously an important compilation, but I was struck by your comments that the Bush administration was aided and abetted by members of the news media and Republican people in Congress. Aren't you? There were also Democratic leaders in Congress that stated that unequivocally that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. That was built upon statements by the Clinton administration with their various drum-ups, contrary to evidence throughout the 1990s. Doesn't that bear scrutiny as well? And I'm sorry, and doesn't it explain the last point that you made about a lack of congressional scrutiny? Because an unfettered congressional scrutiny would also have to point the fingers at those statements as well.
Sure, that's an excellent point. The problem is the Republicans controlled the entire city of Washington. The Congress was in the control.
No, it's not. That's not true. During the buildup of the war, the Senate was under the control of the Democrats. Joseph Biden was head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Well, it shifted in that period because of Jefferson.
After the authorization for it.
Anyway, but your point's well taken about Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats did not exactly show profiles and courage here of holding hearings, but I must also say that Congress has been holding fewer hearings over the last 20 years, and they're also generally issuing fewer subpoenas. The oversight ability of Congress has been diminished in the last 2 decades in general. This is part of a pattern of non-scrutiny, really, of those in power downtown. It is a problem with both parties, and it's a fair point. However, it's also true, I know from the Iraq contract stuff we did later, that there were no hearings for a whole year about contracting on Iraq on Capitol Hill, and that was absolutely when both sides were controlled by the Republicans. The Republicans were not anxious. You know, during Vietnam, a senator named Fulbright criticized the President of the United States for the Vietnam policy and actually had very famous hearings. There has not been anyone in the Senate or the House in either party that has been willing to actually shine the light on some of the questions that we're discussing here. The key with intelligence, which I think is important to note, is we are all laboring under the illusion, which is somewhat true, that yes, there was bad intelligence, but presidents are the ones who decide to go to war, and they're the ones who decide what intelligence they use. And Congress has the ability and the responsibility to sanction and essentially authorize such a war. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in 1964, the whole thing occurred from the alleged attack, turns out we attacked them first, to the vote in Congress occurred in 1 week. This whole thing played out over 18 months. That Congress and that the news media in general was able to discuss it, but generally repeat what they were hearing from Pennsylvania Avenue here and elsewhere, is essentially what happened here. And it was almost like a choir, and it is a problem. When you don't have accountability, you don't have scrutiny, and you don't have independent folks inside their parties, that is what happens. And we've noticed this over 20 years, almost, the center, I mean. And so that is a problem when I say Congress. But I also am frustrated that I have to say that the Republicans themselves inside their own party have not been, in all the debates, there's been no discussion of this. I mean, the answers are exactly the same on everything about Iraq. And so I also take issue with them too, and back to the original point. So, other questions?